Good afternoon. We're back on the record in case number 12, CFA 1083, State versus George Zimmerman.
I have one on tap ready to go, and I'm not sure how long that's going to take. So,
Is that the only other witness you have?
it sort of depends on how late in the day we get, Judge, but it could be.
Does have any more witnesses?
Okay.
Are you prepared to possibly go tomorrow?
If we need to, yes.
My choice not to, but of course if we need to finish this up, we will.
Sure. We do need to check just the...
We'll see how far we go today and see what happens.
Yeah, we're just trying to figure that out because then we have witnesses who we have on standby who I feel as though I'm certain we're not going to get to, and I don't want them just literally just sitting in a room waiting, a couple of them. So I want to try and be realistic on that. We have some other matters that would then need to be, in order to prep for the trial on Monday, that we have planned a full day tomorrow and a full day on Sunday for those. So,
well, let's get going and see how far we get. Okay, Mr. Mann? Oh, sorry.
Could we guesstimate now when we'll stop for the day so we can use that as a guide for having the witnesses on standby?
The court always has the goal of stopping at 5, but if it will take us till 6 to get finished with a witness, we'll stay till then. I know that's not a great definitive answer for you, but let's just see how far we go and we'll readdress that.
We wouldn't likely work past 6, though, so if I'm sure a witness wouldn't get on until what would be 6 o'clock our time, we can release them for the day.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Manti, call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The next witness I would have to do this in the process of the already just kind of hold their stool, regular speakerphone.
Okay.
So I do have the number of the witness I confirmed if he is available and ready.
No.
And there is, again, the matter of motion to compel, which remains out there.
Do you need it for this witness?
Not for this witness, but I would like it addressed before the defense witnesses are being presented, since it pertains to a couple of them.
Okay.
And if there is going to be material given to me, I just wanted to seating.
Well, do you want to talk about that right now? It's the state's motion to compel any expert reports or writings. The defense expert reports or writings.
And specifically, it was during the depositions that we arranged that I think two of the witnesses, I asked them directly if they had reduced any of their conclusions and opinions to written format. And two of them told me that they had, and they had emailed those counsel. And counsel said that he believed that we have a privilege, and so I'll motion to address that as well.
Okay.
We have had correspondence with experts that we have consulted with during these proceedings. I do not have any written reports or statements that I think are required for disclosure by 3.220. The communication I've had with the experts has typically been in response to questions that I've asked or comments that I've requested in response to some aspect of the evidence. They were never designed or intended to be communications in the form of a report or statement that would be discoverable under 3.220. I consider that to be work product because it either contains my thoughts or thoughts of the experts in response to a question that I've asked, and as a result reflects, I think, strategy and work product and is not discoverable. As Mr. Manti indicated, the witnesses have been available for deposition. The depositions have been taken, and the experts have been questioned about those prior communications.
Mr. Manti?
Well, Your Honor, again, respectfully, the reason I filed it is because I believe that if it is, as the witness represented it to be, a written reflection of his opinion and conclusion as it relates to this case, that the witness's statement, I'm not asking for counsel's statements, would not be protected by work product privilege. I think I've said in the Bailey case in my motion. And the Bailey case goes further and says that if there is a claim of work product privilege, that I think the procedure recommended by the court was that those materials be submitted to the court for an in-camera review for the court to decide if, in fact, any or all of that.
You've taken the depositions. Did they indicate that they had given anything in writing to counsel that under 3.220?
They did. They said that they wrote down their conclusions and opinions and sent that to counsel, among other things, which I'm not seeking. But yes, they both, and it's Dr. Doddington and Dr. Wayman who indicated that.
To the extent that they have given a written opinion to the defense, that needs to be provided to the state.
We don't have any written opinions from the expert. I do have email correspondence.
Email's a writing, so if they gave you an email that says what their opinion is, that needs to be given over to the state.
Well, we believe that it's protected by work product for the reasons that I've stated. And
I guess what will happen is that we'll have to go forward with the testimony of the witness, and if there is something that the witness says that they have provided that the court feels at that time should have been given, we'll have to stop the proceedings and have a Richardson hearing.
Your Honor, I think the procedure that was suggested by Mr. Manti in his motion is the correct one. I don't think the case law that he cited turns my communications with experts into statements, but there is a procedure that's set forth here, and that is if a privilege is claimed, then the court should conduct an in-camera review and make a decision. And then we have all parties' interests protected. And citing the Bailey case that Mr. Manti references, there's a procedure to how to handle these things.
Well, then give me all of your emails and let me review them.
I can do that.
I can do that now?
let's take them one person at a time, I think.
Number of pages. Is the same.
Yeah, I should identify in some way.
Number of pages.
This is 8 pages, and this is email correspondence between myself. It may also have included Mr. O'Mara at various points, and witness George Doddington.
George what?
Doddington?
Thank you very much. Okay, I have reviewed these emails, and they are not the type of communication that would fall under expert reports for 3.220, and they will not have to be given to the state. Next one.
Well,
Thank you.
if I might, John, similar with you, you may want to, if the sampling is a lot longer, you'll note that there are trail emails so that you'll see the same email and it gets responded to, then we responded, but you'll get flavor, which I think is similar to what you just.
Okay, and these are emails with,
Dr. Wayman, James Wayman, W-A-Y.
thank you. Okay, I have reviewed these notes also, the emails, and the same ruling. There is nothing contained in these emails that would be required to be disclosed under 3.220.
Thank you, Your Honor. Then the state is ready to proceed. There's more? Very well.
There's another one?
There is very short, about 6 or 8, and truly just scheduling issues.
And these are from?
Dr. French, Peter French.
And in all candor, Judge, Dr. French never mentioned that he had made any such written statements, so I'm content with.
I don't need to review those?
I don't think so.
Okay, with that, are we ready to call the next witness? Could you please say the name before I call?
Dr. Alan Reich, Your Honor. That's R-E-I-C-H. Your Honor, being unfamiliar, so as to hear.
I think the closer you all get, the better you're going to be able to hear.
Hello.
Dr. Reich?
Speaking.
This is Judge Nelson. Good afternoon. If you'll please raise your right hand, we're going to have this. Well, before we do this, do we recognize the voice to be that of Dr. Reich?
I do, Your Honor.
Both sides?
Yes.
Okay, please raise your right hand to be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will testify truthfully in these proceedings, so help you God? Thank you.
Okay, you may proceed, Mr. Mantine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Preliminarily, Dr. Wright, have you tendered a CV or a resume in connection with this case?
I tendered 2 of them, a forensic acoustics one and a more general, more detailed academic one.
Your Honor, at this time I would move, and I believe it has been provided both to counsel and to the court previously.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, the Reich CV will come into evidence. It states exhibit number 2.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Wright, could you please go ahead and tell us a little bit about your academic background, your fields of study, and how long it is that you pursued that for a living?
How long I pursued what for a living?
Let me start with, Doctor, do you have any...
Education. Right. Well, my undergraduate degree is in speech and... So garbled. Oh.
Go ahead, Dr. Wright.
It was all garbled.
Okay. What I'd like to start with is your academic and educational background and history.
Right. I understand it. Okay, my undergraduate degree is in speech and theater from the University of Connecticut. My master's degree is in speech pathology from the University of Connecticut. And my PhD is in speech science from the University of Iowa. And the consulting work I've been doing since 1975.
Okay. You have held which sorts of positions in your academic work?
Have I held?
Yes, sir.
I was a teaching and research assistant in Connecticut for 2 years when I was a master's student. And I was a teaching and research assistant at Iowa for 4 years while I was a PhD student. Then I was an assistant professor at the University of Connecticut for 2 years, from 75 to 77. Then I was a professor, at the University of Washington for 25 years, from 1977, well, 23 years, 1977 to 2000.
Is that when you retired?
Yes. From academia.
Okay.
Not from life, not from work.
Yes, sir. Dr. Wright, have you done something other than simply be a professor?
Have I done work other than being a professor?
Yes, sir.
You mean before I was a professor or since I've been a professor?
Well, you mentioned consulting work. Tell me what it is you do.
Okay. I analyze acoustic signals for investigative agencies and for the courts. I do tape authentication, tape enhancement, tape transcription, gunshot analysis, the sounds of gunshots, speed identification, there's a few other things like that.
Okay. Have you been, I guess, are you a member of any part of professional organizations or similar organizations in connection with your fields of study and specialty? Are those accurately reflected on the resume that you tendered?
They are.
Okay. Dr. Wright, have you consulted for law enforcement, for private corporations, as well as federal organizations over the course of your consulting career?
Yes.
Does that also include private lawyers and private investigators?
Unfortunately, no, I'm only kidding. Everyone, I've worked for both sides pretty equally, actually.
And have you ever been tendered as an expert to testify in the field of expertise in court before?
Yeah.
How many times?
I'm not sure. I think about 25.
Okay. And are those also reflected on your resume?
Yes.
That both state and federal court?
Yes.
You've also authored publications and given presentations over the course of your career?
Yes.
Those are also documented on that resume?
On the longer resume, yes.
Okay. Dr. Wright, tell us how you came to first be involved in the case that we're here about today, State of Florida versus George Zimmerman. Which organization was the first one to contact you?
None.
Okay. How did you get
involved? That may be a surprising answer to. My interest in it was from the internet and from the kind of controversy that was going on. I knew nothing about the case. Out west, they don't pay much attention to things that are going on in the east. It was getting a lot of publicity in the east, but very little in the west, out in Seattle, where I was. I was late in hearing about it, and I heard about it when they released tapes, when the police department, Stanford Police Department released redacted tapes.
Were you contacted by the Washington Post?
Pardon?
Were you contacted by a newspaper?
I can't understand what you're saying.
Were you contacted by a newspaper, Dr. Wright?
Not initially. I was interested and started analyzing the tapes even before I was contacted by Washington Post because I was concerned about the kinds of statements that were being made about the tapes.
Okay.
And then during that period of time, within a month when the tapes were released, I was contacted by Washington Post, and I was recommended by the head of IntelNet.
Is that who you did your initial work in this case for?
That's to provide some seed money to assist me in what I was already involved with.
Okay. Did you prepare, well, let me ask you this. When you go to analyze a tape like this or recordings like these, tell me what sorts of processes you use and why.
Well, this was an unusual one in that we had some very low-level questions that needed to be answered first. That is, first of all, was the speech analyzed? Was the tape analyzed? Was there sufficient quality to be analyzed for any kind of acoustical studies? Not speech necessarily, but for acoustical studies in general. Was it adequate for some acoustical studies? The second thing we were interested in was whether or not all the speech that had been transcribed on the internet was actually representative of the speech that was on the tape. And it was very clear that with different groups saying that different words were different, that there was some transcription problems with the tape, and that there were there were both background sounds and foreground sounds, and only the foreground sounds were being reasonably accurately transcribed. So I was concerned in finding out if we could enhance the tape to bring out background sounds, of which there were hundreds.
All right, Dr. Wright, what I really want to focus on for purpose of today's hearing, you're aware that this is a hearing as to the methodologies that you employ.
I am aware of that,
Okay.
but it's
Let me
important
start.
for the court. Can I answer my question? Your question, please?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, Your Honor, may I answer that question?
Yes, go ahead and answer.
Okay. The reason I'm talking about the signal quality and picking up background signals is that many of the signals that were used for speaker identification were amplified out of the background noise.
So,
It's an important distinction. They were not foreground signals for the most part. They were background, background signals.
so tell me what processes you used and how you went about it.
Well, the practices we use are not practices that are used in analyzing speech in general, which has been done for centuries. That is looking at the sounds of speech and inferring what kinds of movements of the articulators and the throat and so on, the throat, the mouth, the lips, what kinds of movements went into making those particular sounds.
Dr. Wright, are you familiar with oral analysis, and that's oral, AURAL, of a recording such as these?
Because oral analysis refers to AURAL, refers to expert listening, and that's, in terms of my work, that's a very important part of my work in addition to the acoustical work.
Okay. You mentioned the next thing, acoustical analysis. Tell me a little bit about what that involves.
Well, historically, in studying speech in general, well, not even speech, studying sounds in general, whale sounds, bird sounds, speech sounds, we've taken the sounds that these individuals or organisms make, and we break them down into their component frequencies. That is, the sounds that we produce and these other animals produce are sounds that have a lot of overtones or partial frequencies in them.
Just one
And
sec.
we break those
Is it an objection?
composite sound, that overall sound down into the individual frequencies that make it up.
Okay.
That process, in various forms, is called spectral
It's very hard on
analysis.
Dr. Wright,
speakerphone.
just hold on for a
Spectral
minute.
analysis began,
They can't
believe it
hear
or
us
not,
on
in the
speakerphone.
1830s with a mechanical version of what we call a spectrograph.
Okay,
It's rolled around on the floor.
Dr. Wright,
But,
Dr. Wright, we're having a hard time understanding. So if you could speak a little louder and a little slower, and
Okay.
give your responses as to the questions that are asked. Mr. Manti, go ahead and ask your next question. Mr. West, if you need to move up here, you're free to do so.
Thank you. Dr. Wright, I want to focus, you mentioned acoustic and spectrograph, and those are the sort of the two words after the oral analysis that you mentioned. So give your answer in a little slower fashion as it relates to what is it about acoustic analysis and spectrographic things that you did in this case that assisted your work.
I did a variety of different kinds of spectral analyses that have been done for a long time. The spectrographic analysis, long-term average spectra, short-term average spectra, and then a variety of non-spectral measures as well, including pitch patterning and loudness patterning and emphasis kind of patterning.
And Dr. Wright, I'm assuming that you have some kind of computer or software that you use to assist you in doing that.
Well, we do now. Historically, I've been around long enough I wasn't around for the mechanical version, but I was around for earlier analog versions of this equipment. But now it's almost all entirely done on a microcomputer.
Okay. So do you use that computer software also to assist in your analysis of tapes like these?
Entirely, yes.
Okay.
In addition to the oral AUR-AL analysis, the listening analysis, yes.
All right. So all three of those measures then were components of your research in this case? Is that what you're telling us?
Screen meaning AURAL, spectrographically, what's the third?
Well, it's simply the fact that you actually use computer software in addition to help you with that. Is that right?
Well, the computer software generates the spectral analysis.
Okay. Anything
But
about what?
we were generating the spectral patterns, as I said a long time ago, during World War II, using a totally different technique, but functionally the same technique, but about burning charcoal on paper.
Okay. Dr. Wright, anything on, new, novel, completely unheard of before that you employed in arriving at your conclusions in this case?
No, the equipment and the software used is all available to anyone who wants to pay for it.
So, Dr. Wright, I want to focus in particular on what we're here about today, the 911 call, and the identification of the person or persons, if they can be made, of this generator of screens on that tape. Are you familiar with that?
We're talking about the call number 3 on my report?
Yes, sir.
Yes, what's the question now?
Okay. Tell me what let me rephrase that. Did you employ the methods that you just described in an attempt to identify who was the person emitting those screaming sounds?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have a sample, when you did that, of the known voice or represented to be the known voice of George Zimmerman?
Yes, a number of them.
Okay. Did you have a sample when you did that also of a known voice or a voice attributed to be the known voice of Trayvon Martin?
At a later time I did. Not initially I did. There was nothing available, and I insisted that we couldn't proceed without some kind of samples of his speech.
Okay. Did you eventually receive one?
Yes.
And did you use those known samples to compare them to the version on the tape that you said that you listened to containing screams?
Yes.
And when you compare the known samples to the screaming sound, what is it that you actually do?
First of all, we analyze longer speech, listen to longer segments of speech to begin with, but ultimately we try to set up pair comparisons. So we look at relatively short segments of speech, that is sometimes a syllable, or one syllable word, two syllable words, maybe 3 or 4 syllables top, and compare the known and unknown right next to each other, and look at the acoustical characteristics, not just the spectral characteristics, but the acoustical characteristics in general, and listen to them at the same time. So we're listening, and we're not listening to the original tape, listening to copies or tokens that have been extracted from the tape for easier listening by a jury or by us.
Dr. Wright, first off, were you able to determine whether or not you could identify George Zimmerman as what we'll call the person who was making those particular screaming noises once you filtered them out?
Well, I identified a certain number of speech utterances that were not Mr. Zimmerman, but that isn't necessarily all of the loud speech that was on there.
I understand.
That is, I'm ruling out Mr. Zimmerman as producing loud speech, just as the person who was producing the very high-pitched, very loud screams. That's how we define screaming. Phonation or voice reduction that's at a very high loudness level and a very high pitch level. It has to be both. And those utterances, those were not George.
Okay, so you mentioned a high pitch and a phonation.
And the loudness. Pitch and loudness both have to be extremely high.
In order for
screaming. As opposed to shouting, for example, which might be at a high loudness level, but not necessarily at a high pitch level.
And Doctor, are there environmental factors such as, the distance from the microphone that's picking it up, human factors such as the stress that the person might be under? Are there mechanical factors such as the size of the channel or the compression affiliated with the phone and the microphone themselves? There are a lot of things that could affect your ability to analyze sounds like these.
Yes, sir.
Okay. As far as you said that you identified what you referenced as screams as opposed to just some of the loud shouts as not being the defendant, George Zimmerman. Did you identify them as being anyone, and how did you do that?
Well, first of all, I want to mention that first we had to determine whether or not, when I was given that tape, call number 3, I was told by most people that there was no interactive, meaningful speech on that recording. That was all undifferentiated screaming, that there was no linguistic intent. There was no words on that area. So first we had to determine that there were words. And in terms of who they might be, they were a good match for the video demos that I had
Okay.
of Trayvon.
Mr. Wright, if you could just please repeat your last statement, the court reporter was not able to take it down.
Okay. I was saying that in order to determine who said something, we first had to determine that there were words being said, so we got to identify both the words and the speaker. And the words that were at a scream level were almost entirely those of Trayvon Martin.
Now, I understand your report to say that conclusion is a tentative one.
Yes, very.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, because the circumstances of these tapes obviously are not laboratory conditions. We don't have a nice, quiet signal with a positive signal to noise ratio. For example, the example that I sent you, the last word, final word, was down 30 decibels, which is quite a bit down from the surrounding speech. These were very background signals, so they were in the noise floor of the recording. So that alone makes them not very good candidates. Also, the words were not being excerpted from the same sentence context. That's an important parameter.
And you accounted for all those in your conclusion.
Making the conclusion tentative, yes.
Okay? Was that your conclusion that the voice in question was not George Zimmerman? Was that a tentative one, or was that more definite?
Well, it was a little bit different in that the sample size was much, much larger. The amount of speech that we had of Mr. Zimmerman was much, much larger. We had recordings from the jail with his wife. We had a crime simulation tape, and we had a yelling simulation tape as exemplars. So there's a much larger corpus of voice exemplars for Mr. Zimmerman, so that made it a little bit easier. The only thing about this particular test that was easy was the fact that it had a closed set of speakers. And I was told that there was only 2 people that could have been recorded at the site.
You're talking
There
about
were only 2 people involved, and therefore it's a pair discrimination rather than picking from an infinite population of speakers.
Okay, let me take a shot at that. Are you saying that what helped to make this conclusion was that you weren't having to compare these voices or these screams to an infinite number, but you had only 2 voices that you had to worry about as being possibilities in this case?
Yes, and in fact, the decision we're making first is George or not George, or Trayvon or not Trayvon. Very simple elimination decision before we even get to the identification part.
And did you base your conclusions on first of all, I guess, how many hours did you spend listening to these recordings?
100.
On the listening that you did, as well as you referenced the acoustic and spectral analysis, Tell me what it is that you look for there.
Well, we look at a number of characteristics depending on what's available in the signal, of course, because the signals that we deal with are often very, very distorted. These are not entirely the most distorted signals I've ever dealt with. Many of the aircraft, black box recordings of words, for example. But we look at hundreds of different characteristics, both in the spectral realm, that is looking at the noise, the acoustical characteristics of S noise, for example, the acoustical characteristics of T-burst, which is in the word stop, for example. The position of the resonant frequency in the valves and semi-valves. Those are very important characteristics. For example, the resonant frequencies mean the frequencies that are transmitted best at a particular vocal tract shape or movement. And so, for example, the first resonant frequency, which appears as a bar, that first resonant frequency is related primarily to tongue height. When you're talking, as your tongue moves up and down, it affects that frequency the most. The second one is related to the fronting or advancement of the tongue. The third one is related to lip rounding and retroflexion of the tongue tip. That's retroflexion means curling back your tongue tip for R-like sound. So those are just some of them. We have hundreds of characteristics that we look at.
And so you use the auditory comparison by your ears, the sort of visible comparison that the spectrograph allows you to start to make at all those points. And you have the computer assist you in doing that to arrive at your conclusions?
Yeah, so in addition, I use other acoustical tests that are well established that, for example, long-term average spectra, because I was thinking that maybe some other people had done that previously. I wanted to compare that. I did report that in my report.
Yes, sir. Look it up this moment.
Yes, you may. Just one moment, Mr. Reich.
Okay.
And Dr. Wright, did you use all those things in connection with, I think you said that one of the helpful things was just an assumption based on the known facts that there were only 2 candidates for the screening?
Yes.
All those things together?
Pardon?
All of those things together?
I can't understand what you're saying.
Was it all of those things together?
Well, I put all those things together. Is that what you said?
Did you consider them all together in coming up
Yes,
with
consider the oral characteristic, the listening characteristic, to verify the acoustical characteristic, and vice versa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wright. Another question, Dr.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Wright.
You're welcome.
Mr. West is going to ask you questions now. Mr. West, you may have to come up here so he can hear you. It's I don't know if the wires will reach. Bobby, can we see if that? We're moving the phone so it might jostle.
And if we could get an extension, then council could stay at the podium or even at council table. And have access to co-counsel and Mr. Zimmerman.
I know, I think it's going further. Thank you.
Dr. Wright, can you hear me?
Okay, well, I'm sorry, say it again?
Can you hear me?
Hello?
Closer.
Mr. West?
Yes, I'm going to try to get a little closer to the mic.
I hear you fine.
Oh, good. I'm not quite clear what you said your conclusions were, other than that they were tentative. Are you saying that you have not reached a final conclusion at this point?
No, I'm saying that given the number of data points that are available, that it's not possible to reach a definitive conclusion, just a suggested one.
So you, in fact, have not reached an opinion, rather, you just have a tentative impression? Is that what you're saying?
No, I have an opinion, but it can't be a hard and fast opinion because the circumstances are not ideal circumstances.
So it's an opinion, but you don't hold it very firmly.
No, I wouldn't say that. I hold it firmly, but the circumstances, the guidelines for what people expect the samples to be for definitive analysis that were not met.
Well, why don't we talk about that then for a moment? What are the accepted guidelines and standards for speaker identification analysis?
Well, that depends on who's doing the analysis. If it's being done by technical people with undergraduate, with a high school degree, then the standards are different. And I would say that the standards that are used by the identification group, the Association of Identification, that those are appropriate standards for someone at that level. But for someone more with a more sophisticated view, I'm sure those are the best standards. For example, some of the standards that are used by the group are 10 seconds of speech minimum. We have research, repeated research, show that you can use a sample less than 1 second and be able to identify speakers. So it depends on who's doing the identifying. But
Well, let me.
also the number of words. That particular group says 10 words is the minimum number, and the FBI says 20. It's neither of those is really hard and fast. But it's the quality of it.
How many do you use?
Well, there were fairly enough words. Other people have analyzed these and said there were 8 or 10 words. I would agree with that. But that's not the problem. The problem wasn't the number of words. The problem was the quality of the signal.
So let's start here with the speech that you found that was a suitable quality for speaker identification. Did you identify all of that speech, and did you isolate it?
Yes.
And how long was all of that speech combined in time?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I would say that. Hold on one second. Well, I would say that it was at least 4 or 5 seconds at least.
So with your approach,
This is the speech that made up the pair comparison, not all the speech that I listened to. Listen to much more than that.
Yes, and I was going to interpose an objection to see if we could be clear that we're talking about the speech with the voice speaker comparison.
Okay, can you clarify your question?
I think he did.
Okay.
well, it's not clear to me. Let's talk about the audible speech. In that, let's talk about the sounds that can be heard by playing the recording through normal equipment.
Well, yes, go on.
Okay. Did you identify within that various words or utterances that you think are suitable for speaker identification.
Could you repeat that question? It's not entirely clear to me.
Do I understand correctly, Dr. Wright, that you found speech that just about anybody can hear by listening to the recording, and that you also found speech that you can't hear by listening to the recording without special equipment and amplification and such?
Well, that's close but not cigar, so I take that. I just can't pull up the signal on the computer right now. This is the final word, and it's kind of an example of the final word embedded in the 911 caller and the 911 operator context. And you can hear the word stop in there, but it's down 30 decibels. You can hear it, but it takes a tremendous amount of listening to do that. Whereas when I gained it up or amplified that segment, the background segment by 20 decibels, then anybody's able to hear that easily. Whether it's running in real time or whether it's in just the 3 or 4 syllable context.
Well, maybe we'll approach it this way. Do you have a transcript of all of the speech on the 911 call that you believe can be identified by speaker?
Judge, I've interposed already a written objection if we're talking about all the speech on the entirety of the call.
Well, I understand your objection, but I also understand the question is, so Mr. West can then further ask how many words. So overrule your objection.
Would you answer the question, Dr. Wright?
I think the answer is yes, but I'm not sure, because the question is a little bit vague to me.
What I'm trying to get at is, have you identified all of the speech on this recording that you believe can be compared and identified with a speaker?
Yes.
And do you have a transcript of that?
There is no final transcript of that. It's ongoing, and there are pieces of it that involve the speaker identification portion, but there are other pieces that were not analyzed or not transcribed. There are pieces of it that are not transcribable yet, or maybe ever.
Dr. Wright, I'm going to need you to sort of start at the beginning of the answer and repeat it for the court reporter, please.
Okay, where are you going to start?
Well, I'll read you what I have. There is no final transcript of that. It's ongoing, and there are pieces of it that...
There are pieces of it that are analyzable, and pieces that are transcribable, and pieces that are not either analyzable or transcribable. In other words, not 100% of that tape is not going to be transcribable by anybody with any equipment at all. So very difficult.
Have you identified the speaker on all of the speech that you have been able to transcribe?
Yes.
And do you have that written down somewhere?
Yes, I don't have that with me right now.
Is that a document that exists that you could...
There's no given file in the second.
So are you saying your work isn't done yet, and there may be additional speaker comparisons or additional speech recognition that may come later?
The speaker recognition is a different ballgame. That's usually referring to the automated recognition of speech by computer. I'm not doing any of that. It is possible that there might be some comparison that will be done, but right now I don't think there's going to be any further analysis of that type. Because the things that are being uncovered would be of lesser quality rather than of better quality.
just start back at the beginning, and you can tell us specifically how you processed what had been identified as streams on the recording to identify those segments on which you performed a speaker identification. Are you able to do that?
As I mentioned before, the signals were virtually all in the background. So the signals first had to be amplified with the computer. But all that involves is identifying where the very soft signal is, and then multiplying it by some number to make it reasonably close in level and allowing what you perceive as boundless level to the surrounding speech. And that's mostly what was done to all these tapes. There's very little fancy kinds of enhancement that was done. There's mostly just differentially amplified signals that were not identified as speech before. It's when they were background clips and noises, they were not. They were speech.
I think where I'm confused and is that we seem to be talking about two levels of speech on this recording. That one is what's obvious to anyone who listens to the recording as being a yell or cry of some sort. Do you follow me on that?
No, I thought you were going somewhere I could agree with you, but you diverted it last minute. If you meant that it's foreground speech, then certainly there is foreground speech at a much higher level as associated with the 911 caller and the 911 dispatcher. And then the other signals are all that came from the men at the scene of the incident, that speech is much lower level. At the microphone or telephone. Now, if you're talking about a difference in level within what was going on between George and Trayvon, there are some differences in level, but not really significant ones. In other words, all of the productions that were in the background, being produced by these two men, were all without some kind of amplification, were very difficult to decipher in real time.
So you're calling those the background speech?
Well, for want of a better term, yes.
And that's the speech that no one can hear without some amplification.
No, some of you can hear. Like most of them you hear, but it takes a lot of effort and maybe experience.
Are you able to identify at this time where on the recording that speech exists?
The difficult speech?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
And do you have a transcript of that available that you could send to us?
There's no complete transcript available yet. There are samples of comparisons between, and I think you've seen some comparisons between pre-process and process, between the two men and the stop word, for example.
When you say the stop, you're referring to a
Word.
cry of some sort or a word near the end of the recording that others have reported as being the word help. Is that
Can I
right?
play it for you?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Is that the word that we're talking about?
So you put in what context? That's the final word on the tape. And it's the word that was analyzed for both speaker identification and for phonetic transcription. It's PHONETIC.
So maybe perhaps, and I'm sorry that I'm a bit confused with all of this, but let's go back to this. Let's just start over, okay? Let's talk about the standards that are used. You said that some people require a 10-second minimum Others may require more. And are you saying that you require less than 1 second of speech?
I'm saying that the research has shown that under certain circumstances, that only less than 1 second of speech is required to identify someone.
Is that
For
based?
example,
What is that What is that research, and does it relate to identifying people by screens?
no.
So that research.
Very little of the research is identifying people by screen.
Well,
Non-forensic research, there is a small amount, large study, but small amount of data that came out of Nixon, but of the Tosi study.
that goes back to the days where the spectrograph was used extensively. Is that correct?
Extensively or exclusively?
Extensively.
Yes, still is.
And that's back in the era where it would, spectrograph was considered to be a voice print.
Sorry, ask him to repeat.
In the Kirsta, K-E-R-S-T-A era, the term that was considered to be a voice print.
Dr. Wright, would you please go ahead and repeat that from the beginning, not in the Tosi era?
P-O-S-I, I believe, last name is spelled. And not as there's a much later era that takes into account actual field use of the technique. Whereas Kirsta was the early introducer of this equipment to the police department and the investigative agencies. He's what began the ruckus.
Can we take a recess for a few minutes?
Yeah. He's not going to be able to hear me on there. Dr. Wright, can you hear me? Do you mind telling him we're going to take a 10-minute recess and we'll call him back?
Dr. Wright? We are going to have a recess for about 10 minutes, and we will call you back. Is that okay?
That is okay.
All right. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Trish. Council, our clerk needs the CV of Mr. Owen and Dr. Wright so she could put it into evidence. If you'd please provide those copies to her. We'll be in recess for 10 minutes. Dr. Wright?
Yes, thank you, Jones.
Automated voice messaging system.
Try to call it again.
20.
Hello, Dr. Wright.
Yes.
Hi, this is Trish with the court clerks. We're in the courtroom with Judge Nelson on the Zimmerman case. Are you ready to proceed?
I think so. Let me make sure I'm not on speakerphone. Okay, we're set.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. This is John West again. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes is this. Just let me explain what I'd like to do and see if you're able to respond this way. I would like you to tell me the standards in your scientific community on speaker identification to include the quality and duration of the speech sample that's sought to be compared for identification. And if those standards vary, I'd like you to tell me which entities or associations set different standards. And then I want you to tell me what your standard is and whether or not you applied it to this case. Did you follow all that?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's go with the FBI because the FBI doesn't testify. And the FBI uses this technique as an investigative technique, but they don't testify. And their standard is basically 20 tokens, 20 different words, except from the same context, the same sentence context. And the features that are studied are pretty much the same from one group to another. It's not the features that are studied, it's really the number of tokens and the way in which they're prepared. Set up for prepared.
All right, so the FBI uses 20 words.
And doesn't testify.
Are you familiar with any other groups that have established standards?
Yes, I know established.
And what group is that?
Well, it started out as a provided name, but it was the International Association of Voice Identifiers, which is a subgroup of the International Association of Identification.
All right, and as to the number of words or the length of speech, what's the standard there?
10.
Is it 10 words or 10 seconds or either one?
10 words. But they specify by number of syllables.
And how many syllables?
It is specified by number of syllables.
Can you ask me?
Would you have to repeat that, please?
It is not specified by number of syllables.
It's simply a total of 10 words.
Yes.
Is that also considered that you have to have at least 10 seconds of speech or 10 words?
I don't believe the 10 seconds is in there. I have to look. I don't think so.
All right. Are you familiar with any standard the FBI sets for the length of the recording, minimum length?
That's probably a number I've never seen it printed anywhere.
What do you believe it to be?
10 seconds.
And in the organization that you work on developing standards, do you have a length of time of minimum duration for the speech?
Each token or overall?
Either one or both.
I don't think there's any for overall, but I think there is some minimal token length. I can't remember exactly what it was.
So are you saying under the standards that you follow, there is no minimum length of the reported material that's required?
Aside from.
Say that again, please.
It's all right there where you know what else it says. Diphone, D-I-P-H-O-N-E.
Would you explain that, please?
Yeah. A diphone is more than a vowel, more than a consonant, but not quite a consonant vowel. There was a chunk of the consonant and a chunk of the adjacent vowel, but not the whole thing. The speech is used on if you ask for a number on the telephone, that's done by chunking up speech, real speech, into diphones, then putting them together, tagging them together, or concatenating them.
No, the
And
question.
that would be my minimal unit of speech would be a concatenated diphthong. With one diphthong.
Does that have any correlation to time?
Only roughly because if you're saying pla and stra instead of both syllables, the stra is no longer.
Okay, here's what I'd like you to address. Is there any minimum number of words that you use when evaluating a speech sample? And is there any minimum amount of duration of the speech when you evaluate a speech sample?
Not when I evaluate it, no, of course not. After you determine that, you determine by the speaker. In terms of whether or not you reach a decision based on a whole bunch of short samples, then of course you have to take that into consideration.
So, am I saying that you do not have a standard that you apply for the minimum number of words or the minimum duration of the speech before you will attempt a speaker identification?
I don't have a hard and fast rule about it. I don't feel uncomfortable with them.
Are there any other groups?
It's available.
Are there any other groups that have established minimum standards for speaker identification in terms of the speech itself?
I really don't know.
All right, now let's talk about the quality of the speech.
Yes.
What are the standards insofar as the quality of the speech itself?
They're all vague. I don't really comment on them. They're hardly scientific.
For example, are there guidelines or standards regarding screams?
I don't think we can answer that question appropriately. Well, what I'm talking about there is that there are no guidelines saying what the signal to noise ratio of the signal must be, or what the distortion coefficient must be, or what many other noise measures must be.
The question
That's what I'm talking about.
the question I'm asking you about whether there are standards that apply to emotionally driven speech, shouts, cries, yells, that sort of thing.
I'm talking with the word standard, in that are those factors that are taken into account when doing the work? Absolutely. Are there standards that are specifically ironed out for a particular kind of emotion? I mean, probably not.
So there are no strict standards that you've established for yourself on either the number of words or the length of the speech or the emotional state of the speaker. Is that correct?
I have internal standards for the work that I do based on my research activity, based on my review of the literature over many, many years. I don't have external standards that are based on what somebody with a high school education needs to do.
Well,
Do you think that
one might assume that the standards set by the FBI aren't made by someone with only a high school diploma.
I would rule that out?
So you don't adopt the standards set by the FBI?
I do not adopt the standards set by the FBI.
So what are your specific standards then that you apply when you do this kind of work?
Judge, ask and answer multiple times.
Okay, I'll let him ask it this one more time.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I couldn't hear what you said.
You can answer the question, sir.
I can answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, what was the question again? Do I have internal standards or?
Yes, what are the internal standards that you apply when you do this kind of work on speaker identification?
That there's a reasonable corpus of speech data to evaluate. That reasonable corpus of data depends on the nature
Reasonable
of the
corpus of
and the
speech.
nature of the task.
No, you
Not something that
must-
you just put a number on.
You do a subjective analysis then to decide whether it's suitable without any particular hard and fast rules. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sure. Why don't you tell me what a hard and fast rule would be? I'll tell you when I adopt it. I'm not clear what you're saying.
A hard and fast rule, for example, might be that no speaker identification should be attempted because it's not reliable if the speech sample is less than 14 seconds long.
I think not such a rule, and that would be overly conservative.
So you would disagree with that standard and you would not apply it in your own work?
I wouldn't apply it as a hard and fast standard, and that would be 14 seconds of speech. Absolutely not. It's not based on anything but a committee sitting around deciding that. The research should support that.
Tell me the research that you are thinking of and referring to when you talk about the standards that should be applied for speaker identification work.
That doesn't ring a bell what you're saying. I'm not saying that the research is on standards. I'm saying that the research tells us what kinds of minimal signal qualities we need in order to make identification. They may not be appropriate for forensic situations, but nonetheless, they tell us. And so, for example, if 1/8 of a second of a nasal like M can identify you as a speaker 99.9% of the time, I don't care whether or not you have 14 seconds of speech. All I need is 1/8 of a second. If that's there in the signal.
And when you
That's what I'm saying. That's speaker specific and spoken specific. Speech, sound, and word specific.
When you say in the signal, are you talking about a spectrograph representation?
No, I'm talking about a time with yes and no. Yes, I'm talking about any kind of crystal measure of speech, whether it's a time waveform measure of speech, a spectrographic measure, a long-term average spectra, short-term spectra, an FFT, whatever.
All right. Let me ask you specifically then, if you don't have specific standards that you can identify to us that you always apply when doing this kind of work, can you identify the standards that you did use in this case regarding the duration of the signal or the nature of the speech itself?
I think the easiest way to answer that is to say that there are standards for how the experiments are set up. For example, in England and in Florida, at the Screw Gates Institute, they have specific ways they set up the listening experiment. I have specific ways that the pair comparisons are set up for both listening and spectrographic analysis. So there are structural things that are standards. If you're talking about specific things about the signal, and we discard signals because they don't have some external criteria. Well, it depends. They're interactive variables. And there are many different things that affect speech and speech patterns, and they aren't always predictable, and they're not the same from person to person. It's difficult to establish kind of standards you are talking about. For example, I'll just give you an example of a testimony I gave in court in Chicago. I listened to one of these people that had standards within one of these organizations talk about a spectrogram. Well, the settings on the equipment were set wrong. And so what he was saying was a resonance frequency was actually the fundamental frequency of pitch. They was looking at pitch patterns rather than formats or extra frequency patterns. It didn't make any difference what kind of standards he had. He wasn't doing the work right. I'm more interested in the work.
All right. Speaking of that then, let's move to the work that you did on this case. Do I understand correctly? Let's categorize the two types of sound that you identified, the foreground and the background. The foreground being the obviously audible sounds, and the background being the sounds that were not readily
Right,
audible.
Most of the program sounds came, as was mentioned before, came from the 911 operator or the caller.
All right.
Some of the sounds did come from the man.
All right.
So, you have a question about that?
Well, I'm talking about when you play the recording through a set of speakers, you can hear somebody yelling or screaming. Do you agree?
So during that first 45 seconds?
Correct.
Page number 3? Of course, yes.
Right. That's the speech I'm talking about.
The background speech. For the whole thing. Background speech.
Do I understand from your report that in addition to the sounds that are evident when you listen to the recording, you also have identified speech, but only through amplification. That's only through amplification. It's otherwise not audible.
No, that's the part I felt with that last part of the phrase there. They are audible, but they are very, very low in level and require very careful listening. And they're very difficult to listen in real time. That's why we separate them out. We edit them out into listening pairs.
Let's talk about how much speech that you are able to identify that is not masked or overlapped, but that you have a clear sample of the speaker. Are you able to do that?
I read the meaning of the text. Want to repeat for it, please?
Yes, let's talk about the speech that you are able to isolate that wasn't masked or overlapped with other speech that you could then consider for
foreground speech or background.
the guy yelling. That speech.
That's what? That guy you got cut off there. I didn't hear the last word.
Do you hear somebody yelling for help on this recording?
One. There's the word help, I think.
Your testimony is that after analyzing this recording, you hear someone say help once, and that's all?
What? What are you talking about? I'm sorry, I'm another many different words on here. Some which are mentioned in the report.
All right, I'm sorry about the back up.
I'm begging you. How about I'm begging you? Or
Let's
get off of me. Or stop. Or
we'll get to those. We'll get to those soon. But I'm talking now about the audible speech of someone screaming, and whether you've been able to isolate that speech without masking and overlapping, so that you can use it to compare with the speaker identification.
yes, that way. But it's not a requirement that be non-overlapping because much of the speech that's on there, for example, the very first example, the beginning of tape number 3 or call number 3 has 3 people talking at once. That's not at all unusual on the tape of overlapping speakers.
Right, but for speaker identification, do you require speech that's not masked or overlapped with other speech?
It depends on who's overlapping. If you have a child overlapping an adult male, that wouldn't be a big problem. Because their frequencies, their resonant frequencies would not overlap that much. If you had two women overlapping about the same age, that would be a problem probably. If they were
Did you attempt
simultaneous at the time.
Did you attempt to isolate the unmasked, non-overlapping speech for analysis? And how long was that speech altogether?
That's not a requirement to measure the overall length of the speech.
Did you do that?
I could do it, but I don't do it as no meaning to it.
So the standard that you talked about, for example, a 10-second minimum for the FBI that has a 16-second minimum, that's not a standard that you apply in your analysis for any length of time.
Many of the analyses that I do involve very long corpuses of speech, about 50 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. There's no hard and fast rule about it. And minimally, there's sufficient signal quality. It wouldn't make any difference to go below that standard and then analyze 4 seconds,
So
3 seconds.
is it your opinion that there was sufficient signal quality in this case for a reliable speaker identification?
I think there was sufficient quantity of signal to analyze, but it was not always of sufficient quality.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about the report itself and the methodology that you used, you point out that it was important to you and critical to your analysis the 16-bit reporting.
Yes,
The 16-bit amplitude resolution.
amplitude resolution.
Why was that critical, and how does that affect your analysis?
Well, that's a very good question. The reason that is for that is that then divides the loudness scale, the amplitude scale, into a large number of increments. So that gives us an opportunity to have a much larger range from the loudest sound you can record to the softest sound you can record. So, for example, the 16-bit gives you a signal-to-noise ratio on the recording of about 95 dB. That's from the range from the loudest to the softest sound. Whereas an 8-bit recording might only give you 35 dB. There's a huge difference.
And
the reason for that,
that's critical to your analysis in this case, because if it, well, I'm asking you, why was that critical? What if you did not have 16-bit amplitude resolution in this case?
Well, that would have been much more difficult because the gradations of amplitude would be very large, and the signal would be very low in level. It would be very inadequate representation of the signal.
So that would,
because the signals are so far down, like the stop word, it sounds 30 decibels. If your signal noise ratio is only 35 decibels, that would be sitting literally in the noise floor.
so if you did not have this 16-bit amplitude resolution, you would be unable to be as confident in your findings?
I would say that would true, yes. For certain tokens.
And how is it that you know that what you processed there was, in fact, 16-bit amplitude resolution?
I was told.
How were you told and who told you?
I believe I was told by the Stanford Police Department, but I'm not sure.
Did you call the Stanford Police Department?
No, I don't think I called directly to the police department. I think I called 911 center.
So do you remember calling the 911 center and asking them about this issue?
I called about some recording instructions.
The recording that you analyzed was the recording that was provided to you by the state attorney's office?
That a separate recording that was non-redacted.
Correct. So the state attorney was the source of that recording.
Yeah, so the recording was essentially identical with the exception of the addresses and names we put back in. If you look at signals that were excerpts from Washington Post studies and what I did recently, they look identical.
Do you know that what you analyzed? Do you know that what you analyzed was, in fact, the recording with 16-bit amplitude resolution from any other source in your conversation with the Stanford Police Department?
Well, I don't think I had very good information about the digital recording in general. That's sort of typical these days. The signal is described. When I read the signal to signal analysis program, all the characteristics of the signal is digital. They're all present on a list that lists everything that's there. So when that's listed as part of the signal, is what we call a header, and the header describes the verbal description of all the characteristics of the signal that comes with the signal. And that's what I'm saying. That's what I call them about the 16 bits, because that's already in the description in the header.
In the description in the header of what?
Of the digital file. That's kind of what digital how the digital file is saying. Maybe just so you say it was helpful. All it is a series of amplitude values that come out as a result of native beat converter. What that means is that the voltage meter reads the signal X number of times per second and writes that file on the computer. So that, for example, the signal, and it was, this case was sampled at 8,000 samples per second. That means that each time we have a second speech and being input to the computer, we have 8,000 numbers. Then those numbers are described in terms of signal characteristics. So in along those numbers, there's a header file that tells you what the sampling rate was, what the dip resolution was, and so on.
And all of that information is in the file itself that you got?
That's correct.
Another question about the specifics. You indicate in your report that, and I think in your testimony, that there was some speech that you enhanced considerably using various techniques, including Sony SoundForge. Is that correct?
I use Sony SoundForge to enhance too, but I did actually very little enhancement. Most of what I did was to differentially gain or amplify those very soft segments. We didn't really require enhancement.
And
Very minimal enhancement.
you recognize then, though, that while the enhanced signals that you evaluated may have been less noisy, the speech was not significantly improved.
Oh, no, okay, that's a good section on here. Okay, got it confused. Okay, the last time I was attempt to globally enhance the tape being recorded. That is to apply, like for example, Dolby. Dolby is a noise reduction algorithm that applies to a signal in general. Tries to enhance everything. That's generally not very successful in the kind of tape we're dealing with here. That wasn't at all successful in what I did.
So according to what you said here in your report, you didn't make the speech any better through those global enhancements.
They weren't involved. They're not on any sample tape, on any demo tape, and they weren't involved in the speaker identification or the speech phonetic transcription. But that was something that I tried to do AHC, and the answer we couldn't.
Okay.
That wasn't done.
So speaking of enhancements and such, I know that you use your computer because you ran certain software that you've been talking about. But did you use a computer software program for purposes of speaker identification?
No, that would be automatic speech recognition.
Yes. Well, I'm not saying automatic speech recognition. I'm talking about computer software that's designed to identify the speaker.
Yeah, that's automatic speech recognition. Speaker recognition, if you wish. Call both.
Right. Are you familiar with that technology?
Of course, that's fine.
Do you have access to that technology?
I don't have access to it now because I'm not in the academic field. I never used it forensic. It's relatively inappropriate for forensic use. Too rigid, not flexible enough. The kind of noise and distortion conditions we get in real life situations.
So, although you would have this computer software available to you for speaker identification, you choose not to use it because you're not satisfied it's reliable?
It isn't reliable in forensic situations. A majority of the studies are not.
So, insofar as...
You pull a bunch of people that try to dictate into their phone or dictate into their little tablet, see how successful they are. Some are successful with speaker recognition, some are not so successful. That's the answer.
So you wouldn't rely on it in rendering an opinion on speaker identification?
Not typically, no.
And you didn't in this case?
No.
So what I'd like you to help me with then is exactly what you did that resulted in you tentatively identifying speakers on this recording, and I know that you've not used the computer software approach. So you use the aural spectrogram, the spectrographic approach. Is that basically what you did?
Well, that would be the combined method. I used at least that, including some other more recent tests.
Well, I'm talking about...
Basic comparisons were being made orally, A-U-R-A-L, orally and spectrographically. It's not just spectrograph. Now we have computers, we're able to do many different acoustical tests as far as our spectrographic menu, if you will.
Did you isolate segments of speech that you wanted to listen to and then compare that speech with known speech to form an opinion whether it was or could be the same speaker?
Absolutely.
And do you have those pairs? Did you record those pairs?
I have thousands of them.
So you generated thousands of known and
Thousands of files. I don't know make comparisons about that, but I have thousands of files that have signals on.
Do you have discrete segments of speech that you compared with other known speech that you evaluated insofar as speaker identification?
Isn't that the same question?
Well, I'm asking you, do you have that, and can you identify specifically?
I have it. Yes, it's on the computer, yes.
Can you identify specifically for us those segments that you were able, in your mind, to compare successfully, that were suitable for comparison, and that you were able to compare?
If you wanted a list, I'll send you a list.
All right, that would be very helpful. It may be beyond what we're doing here today, though, but if you'd go ahead and send it, that would be great.
Amplifies my answer to the question. The comment that some of the pairs involve enhancing the segment for example, if you speak to particularly fast, well, one of the things I did in some of the pair practice was to slow down the speed. I didn't use that ultimately, but I looked at that.
Well,
I was looking at more than one type of pair of the same speed.
what does that method involve? What do you call that, and how does it work?
Well, in other words, a regular pair comparison, we have the unknown first typically, and then the speed style in the interval to be half second, second, and then the signal, the exemplar. The exemplar could be processed in some way to make it match the loudness, or make it, always the case, this is study, or to match the overall duration of the speed, in other words, the speed rate, those kinds of things.
Did you do that here? Did you manipulate the speech in order to make it more like the unknown speech?
Just temporarily, to see how it's out like this. It was on almost all of them.
All right, so that's your
If there are significant differences in speech rate, then I do it on most of them as a temporary procedure. It's not in the final pair comparison.
how does that then lead to the final pair comparison?
Because it tells us what influence speech rate had on a perception. For example, we also, this will tell you back a little bit thing, we also play the speech backwards. The reason we play the speech backwards is to emphasize voice quality, spectral quality of the speech without any meaning associated with it, without any words associated with it. So that's often a frequent tactic that we use.
Did you do that here?
Yes.
And did you apply that method to all of the speech that you've identified in this case?
Not all of the speech, but the one for which was appropriate.
Well, did you apply that method to all of the speech that you have now identified in this case?
It is appropriate for all of the speech.
Did you apply that to all of the speaker identification that you did?
it isn't appropriate for all the secret identifications.
What circumstances are you saying that it would be appropriate and when it would not?
Well, for example, it wouldn't be appropriate to wear a top.
I do.
Because the
It would not be
the word
appropriate.
top, certain kinds of sounds are what we call velocity dependent, meaning that the speed of your tongue movement and your lip movement is going to affect the identification of the sound, and therefore change the meaning of the word. And so it's backwards or forward. It would alter the whole pattern. Sounds like the water sound might has a movement too. The law sound, they also might not be appropriate.
So you use this approach sound by sound?
Not sound by sound, simply syllable by syllable, or diphone by diphone.
I would still like to focus your attention, Dr. Wright, on here's what I'm trying to get at. I'm not doing a very good job, I apologize. There are certain cries, certain screams that are readily obvious when you play the recording. Do you agree with that?
Obviously, the screens or obviously what they're saying.
Utterances, sounds, clear, audible sounds.
And you can identify phonetically or just hearing sound.
I'm talking about discrete utterances that you can isolate. You may also claim to be able to identify spoken words, but at least it's a clear, discrete utterance.
You can answer this several times, but yes.
Okay. And some of those words, some of those utterances, you are able to ascribe speech to, words that you can identify.
Many.
And you have a transcript of that you're going to send us?
I answered that several times. We've done especially a complete transcript. We are in progress.
Okay, but that's one step. Then there's another group of speech that you are claiming to identify in your report that seems to be subtext. It seems to be underneath soft-spoken speech that's not in that first group. Am I correct?
Yes, you mean it's not necessarily soft as what I come and call one.
The 911 call.
These questions we answer, we both them. The only other speech that I was talking about in the report was the sidebar speech that I was talking about.
Yes, I think maybe the sidebar speech would be the way you describe it.
That's on call number one. It's George's sidebar speech.
All right, before we get to that, I was referring to sidebar as being less audible speech than the voices that are screaming or crying out.
I was referring to sidebar as a side. Someone talking to themselves or talking to someone other than the principal listener.
And in that sense, you're saying there is speech that you've been able to find on the non-emergency call that's lower or underneath the obviously audible speech?
Yeah.
And what was your method for that?
Judge, I object at this point from now beyond, again, the scope of Fry motion as it relates to the reason I filed an objection.
Right. Well, Dr. Reich had indicated that he evaluated both call number 1 and 3. So I think we're on to the second call, and Mr. West is entitled to ask the questions regarding that call.
As long as, and I would simply ask if he's asking about that first non-emergency call, he referred to specifically mentioned such as call 1.
It may help, Mr. West, if you refer to those calls as Dr. Reich has put them, because it seems that there's miscommunication or misunderstanding as to which call you're talking about on his part. So perhaps if you used call 1 and call 3, he would be able to answer the questions.
Yes, and thank you. I'm the one that confused that. Dr. Wright, we're talking now about call 1.
Yes.
And you examined this, and you've found some speech on this recording that's not obviously audible when one listens to the recording?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that there are voice shifts that have shifted from softer speech to louder speech, from breathy speech to non-breathy speech to spasmodic speech, to harsh speech, so on. So there was sometimes it went down slow, but nowhere near as slow as the signal level, the background signal on call number 3.
Well, keeping your attention on call number 1,
Yes.
are you saying that if one were to listen to this recording, even with good quality headphones, that they would be able to hear the speech that you referenced?
Well, that depends on the listener. For example, one of the phrases that, am I allowed to say one phrase on that?
Well, if you could identify where it is you believe there was speech, certainly we could go
Well,
from
I
there.
just identified others to speak. It has to do with these expletives. They always get away. You know what I'm talking about?
I do, although I don't.
These assholes, they always get away, but not on me.
Right, you have concluded that there is that statement, but not on me, as a result of applying a method to identifying speech.
My standard methodology that's used in acoustic phonetics to identify speech.
So are you saying?
First they have to be amplified.
So that was my question. If somebody just listens to this recording with good quality headphones, they're not going to hear that, are they?
They'll hear it if they loop the signal. That's one of the problems I have with courts and audio recording, that they don't give the jury a fair chance to listen to the signal. Experts don't listen to signals running in real time. They listen, in the old days, they listened with tape loops. Now we listen with segments on the computer. They have to be doing an opportunity to listen to the speech in short segments. And if you listen to the speech in short segments, with your earphones on, yes, you can hear it.
Short segments being segments that you have sort of extracted from this and then amplified?
Well, in this case, the segments are quite a bit longer than the segments on the call 3. And we have couple of phrases and a sentence.
Did you use any different methodology on analyzing this recording than you did on call 3?
Not for the word identification, no.
And how is it that you were able to actually identify the words that you believe were spoken as opposed to just being able to reveal sounds?
That's a good question. By listening to them and looking at the characteristics, what we call the acoustic features that go along to making up the sound. So to give you an example, make it easier for the court. For example, the S sound. If you want to produce the S sound, there are certain physiological features, certain acoustical features that must be met. Goals, G-O-A-L-S, goals that must be met. They include air coming from the lungs, we call egress of airflow from the lungs. They include constriction in the oral cavity, preferably at the upper gum bridge. Sufficient constriction, these are all the features. Sufficient constriction at the gum bridge, the upper gum bridge, alveolar gum bridge, to produce turbulent airflow.
Okay.
The whole thing is, there's a set of about 30 different features that we look at, and then we determine whether or not that produces the correct kind of sound, given those physiological features.
And then you listen, and then you try to figure out what words were spoken?
Not just listen, look for these features, 25 or 30 features.
All right, so what we're talking about in your report is your attempt to arrive at a trustworthy and stable transcription. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, which means that once you process this, then you should have a trustworthy and stable transcription.
For the signals that were of sufficient quality after enhancement to yield that kind of analysis, yes.
Well, are those signals appropriate, the ones on call 1 that we've been talking about?
No, most of them are, but there's a one section after the section has to do with he's running. They know the section. He says the Zimmerman is running.
I remember the section. I don't see that in the reporting, though. I'm sorry. I don't see that. I don't see that in the report. What I want to focus.
I can't even answer the question, but I'm not going to know the question.
What I want to focus your attention on is when you prepared a preliminary report, including a transcript of some of these statements that you heard on that call 1, and then you prepared your second report that you provided to the state attorney's office in May of this year, the transcript changed.
Right.
And the transcript changed on the report from what you told us in our partial deposition a couple of weeks ago. And I thought that once...
You can be more specific about the thing?
Yes, give me just a second. I'm looking at the report. It's not dated, but it was when you said that you prepared in connection with the work for the Washington Post. And on the second page, in the second full paragraph, do you have that available?
Not readily. I can pull it up on the computer. That's right. You tell me.
All right, well, I'll read this sentence for you. You're talking about call 1 and the words that precede and then follow that reference, these assholes always get away. You see what I'm talking about? Okay. And in the first report, you say that you hear the words, dear, dear, dear God, followed by a whispered, you can count, yep, on me. Whereas in your newer report, you say, only dear God, and then you say it's followed, but not on me. So your transcript changed, and I'm trying to understand.
You know, the middle section, you got the middle section, the asshole section. That was the same.
Does it take a speech scientist to hear the words these assholes always get away?
Well, I think so, because there were thousands of people who thought they were raped and slaughtered. More than thousands. Maybe millions. That was a bone of contention. The reason why I analyzed that section.
You know, you mentioned that at the very beginning, that you took an interest in the case because you'd seen a lot of internet discussion about the recordings. Is that right?
About specific transcription of the recordings and what they meant in terms of politics and so on.
And that you decided at that point to take this on yourself to do some work?
Just to explore it. I want to know what all the emotion was about.
Did you begin to do an analysis with that in mind?
Yes.
And did you?
With that in mind, means that we wanted to get an accurate transcription of certain areas of the tape.
All right. And
Some of which I still can't get.
so did you do this independently or at the request of the newspaper?
Not before the
And then did you
We started before the newspaper, and as I'm going to the present day.
Did you contact the newspaper to tell them you were working on this?
No.
How were you contacted?
They were recommended to me, referred to me by Jim Carino, C-A-R-I-N-O, the president of Intelnet.
So did you work out an agreement for them to do some additional work for some compensation?
I call it seed money. It was very minimal amount.
You said tease money?
C.
Seed money. Thank you.
That's a seed.
Mm-hmm. And how much money did you receive from the Washington Post?
2,000.
And about how much time had you invested in the case by the time you submitted this report to the Washington Post?
Well, hundreds of hours. Several hundred.
Several hundred hours up to the point that you gave the Washington Post this report.
That's right.
And that was when, please?
I think May, I'm not sure. May 2012.
Okay. And then when you were contacted by the state attorney's office, is that how it happened? Someone from the state attorney called you?
I think so, yeah.
And when was that?
I think that was soon after the Washington Post report.
And did you,
Within 3 or 4 weeks of the report.
so probably June of 2012?
That sounds right.
And did you provide the
I have
state,
to look it up. I'm not.
did you,
I'm sorry.
did you provide the state attorney with the report you had prepared for the Washington Post?
For the redacted version, yes.
And then did they hire you to do more work on the case?
They did.
And what are your financial arrangements with them?
Really,
And how many hours have you worked on their behalf in this case?
I'm not sure.
Well, can you ballpark it?
Hundreds.
100 or 200 or 300?
I haven't added it up.
Can you come anywhere close?
I work by the hour. I can't tell you. I haven't added it up.
You don't keep time records?
I do. I haven't added it up.
Have you sent them any bills?
You got a retainer from them.
How much was that?
I believe the retainer was 7,500.
Okay. And what's your hourly rate?
$100 an hour. I'm a bargain.
So approximately how many hundreds of hours have you worked on this case up through today?
Excuse me, my chair is broken. Yeah, I would say between 500 and 700 together.
Could it be even more than 700?
It could very well be. There's airplane crashes that we've been working on for 20 years.
So it might even be 700 or 800 or even 1,000 hours that you put in this.
I don't think it's 1,000. It's irrelevant anyway. It's a high number of hours of this kind of thing.
So let's use a round number. Let's say you have 700 hours. 700 hours in the case. 700 hours in the case would be about $70,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that's.
I built all of it.
Well, why wouldn't you bill all of it? Are you not expecting to be paid for your time?
I guess that's an academic thing. We are lowering ourselves.
Well, are you doing them a favor? Have you agreed to discount it if they use you?
No. Because they what?
Have you agreed to discount your rate if they call you as a witness?
No. I haven't agreed to discount anything. But I often, on jobs that involve very extensive transcription work, that's where the time we're talking about to the transcription, I frequently discount the transcription work.
When do you,
It's so time consuming, and otherwise I wouldn't get the work.
when do you expect to finish the transcription work in this case?
Sometime in the next couple of weeks.
And how many more hours do you think it's going to take you to do that?
I have no idea. Only God knows.
between now and then, you may be able to identify additional speech?
I think a little bit, but that's some, but not a whole lot. It's in a final transcript mode. In one section, as I told you, where in file number 1, he says he's running. That section involves a tremendously distorted section. Lasts about half a page, 3/4 of a page. That probably is not going to change. Probably going to be mostly unintelligible.
Do you have any speech that you've identified in that section of call 1?
The section where he's running?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's not in your report?
No, it's not my report.
And when would that transcript be available?
Saying down the other side of it. But much of the speech that's been out there so far is the square package was on my transcript. He has the best interpretation. Or its asterisk would be that unintelligible. You know, the joint checks on the single transcript. It's got a lot of missing stuff, missing information. I'm not even sure what it is. We can't agree on what the distortion is. Sounds like closed noise mixed in with the distortion of a cell phone. Like the cell phone is being bent. The circuit board of the cell phone, smartphone probably, was being bent while he was running. Pressure of his chest against the screen that distorts the signal.
Did you reference any of this in either of your reports?
No, we just discovered it.
So really, that's ongoing work that I'm sorry, I have no idea what you just said. Are you saying that you've now done it?
Sorry, Your Honor, again, beyond the scope of speaker identification,
Okay.
it's not just speaker identification.
This is a Fry hearing.
Yes, but that includes the speech identification, speech recognition as well, that this witness claims to be able to identify on both calls. That's part of this Fry proceeding as well. Whether this witness is able
Fry
to do
proceeding is first and foremost to determine whether or not the methodologies used were new and novel.
that. Yes, and if those methods can be applied to the facts of the case in a reasonably reliable way, basically, whether it's within the standards accepted by the relevant scientific community.
Okay. I'm going to sustain the objection.
Well, I would ask the court to reserve, and I won't ask further until we at least get the rest of the report.
Well, you can't ask him any more questions on something that hasn't been provided, so
Yes.
of course I'll reserve onto that.
So, on how you got involved in this, you got interested because of some of this stuff. Did you take the context of what was being said and happened into account when you did your work?
I think the context, emotional context, linguistic context, no context.
The factual context of what evidence was in the newspaper or in the media about what was supposed to happen.
I wasn't interested. I was interested in the data in the recording. I really don't know that much about change itself.
You don't know the general facts of the case?
Only in a very superficial way, maybe.
Did you take into account any of the facts that have been in the media in evaluating the speech or the speaker identification?
Well, I knew that it wasn't nigger, it was asshole.
You're talking about what? Some reference to call 3?
Well, one
Call 1, I'm sorry.
was asshole, their way.
Right.
It was niggers, it was understanding.
Who told you that? I've never seen that anywhere.
It was all over the internet.
But you established conclusively that's not what was said.
Absolutely.
So, For example, Dr. Wright, were you aware that there was a witness who saw George Zimmerman?
Counsel testifying about what any witness might have said. You can ask if the doctor was aware of anything or what the doctor was aware of, but I would object he didn't testify.
Well, this is cross-examination. Overruled.
Dr. Wright, were you aware that there was a witness who testified that he saw part of the altercation and that he saw Trayvon Martin straddling George Zimmerman, striking him, and that George Zimmerman was crying for help? Did you know that?
Yes, sir.
Witnesses have said that many things.
Well, did you take that into account in trying to identify
I
the
didn't take that
speakers?
specific interest into account because I didn't take any witnesses into account. I was interested in witnesses. I was interested in what they, excuse me, I was interested in what the recordings told me.
Did you take into account the injuries to George Zimmerman, that he'd been punched in the nose?
I took into account the acoustic patterns and oral patterns that were on the recording. That's what I was asking you. That's what I did.
Do you think that being punched in the nose might affect nasality, for example?
It could.
Did you take that into account?
There was no evidence of that on the recording.
So there was no measurement you could make of nasality?
Although the next I could make of nasality, there's no evidence of any major nasality in this case. The nasality or hyponasality effect.
Yes,
That
sir.
doesn't mean it couldn't have been there in between, senses or whatever.
No, I'm sorry, Dr. Wright, we stepped away from the speakerphone for a moment. The analysis that you did on call 3, you have, as a result of the oral spectrographic analysis, you have identified speakers being George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, is that correct?
Correct.
You've also recognized that there was a
And it should be
tentatively then. Is there anything else that you could do with this, the information that you have, that you could reach a definitive opinion?
No.
So did you also, of course, heard the 911 operator and the person talking on the phone, correct?
You know that seconds or what are we talking about?
I'm talking about as you reviewed the 911 call, you
The
heard
whole call?
you heard the 911 operator, correct?
Yes.
You heard the person, the female who made the call,
Yes.
and you may have heard a sound of someone in the unit with her.
Jeremy.
And did you hear any other voices on the recording?
The other person was mentioned in my report was Jeremy.
We're going to ask, Doctor, that you not identify anyone by name other than Mr. Martin.
I identified my name on the case.
So what I'm looking at then, other than the people that you've identified, the male speaker that you've now said is Jeremy, the female who placed the call, the 911 operator, and Mr. Martin and Mr. Zimmerman, have you heard any other voices on that recording?
that a no?
Could you repeat your answer?
I need the question reposed.
The people that have been identified as being on the recording include George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin, the female who placed the call, the person you identified as Jeremy, and the 911 operator. Correct? Okay.
Yes.
Other than those individuals, did you identify any other speakers on the recording?
No. Not in the first 25 seconds. That's the first 60 seconds.
Right, we're limiting it to the first 45 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Manti, any redirect?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Wright, we're finished. We're finished and we're going to hang up the phone. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, so it's scheduling. It's 4:38. Do you want to start with another witness now, or do you want to come in tomorrow morning?
Judge, that will conclude the presentation on behalf of the state. So.
Okay. Mr. West, do you want to call another witness now or come in the morning?
May I have just a moment?
Yes,
Thank
you may.
Judge. To confer with Mr. Manti?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
here, so he knows what we were talking about is scheduling matters. And the defense has 3 more witnesses that they're calling for the Fry hearing, and we're not going to even get through one of them if we were to even stay here till 6 o'clock. So we've all agreed to continue the Fry hearing until tomorrow at 9:30. So we'll reconvene about that. At this time, before we recess for today, we have defendant's motion to extend curfew.
Your Honor, the motion speaks for itself. Let me just clarify that I had contact with the Zimmerman County Sheriff's Office, who does the GPS monitoring for Mr. Zimmerman, and they take no position on whether the court should or should not grant it, but I was advised that they could accommodate the court's order extending the curfew till 11 o'clock. The reasons why we need it are set forth in the motion, so Mr. Zimmerman can visit with us, meet with us, and or witnesses as needed, well past the 6 p.m. curfew that's currently established.
Okay. Is there any objections from the state?
We would object, Your Honor, based on the prior grounds that regarding passport and money issues that were lied about by the defendant or defendant's wife. And so we feel that the court should adhere to,
Yeah.
if I may. And so we would object to the extension of grounds. I think they're wanting 2 things. One is for him to be able to travel outside of Seminole County and also the time. So we would object to both of those.
As far as
Traveling outside Seminole County, I believe the prior order said that he could travel outside of Seminole County to go to Mr. O'Mara's office. That will remain in full force and effect. I will extend the curfew till 10 p.m. But his travel is just outside of Seminole County is to your office. Okay? With that, we'll be in recess until tomorrow morning at 9:30.